out front on the dirty dozen tax scams. You know, as I was sitting there thinking about it, the Financial Fraud Enforcement Task Force has its own website. It's www.stopfraud.gov. I think what I'd like to do, if possible, is make sure that this IRS tax scam news release is uploaded to that website and made available to as many people as possible. Our next panel is on business opportunity fraud schemes. Its moderator is Charles Harwood. He's the Deputy Director of the Bureau of Consumer Protection with the Federal Trade Commission. The panelists are Lois Greisman, the Associate Director in the Division of Marketing Practices at FTC, Andre Barat, who you heard from earlier, the United States Attorney for the Central District of California, Richard Goldberg is the Assistant Director of the Consumer Branch in the Civil Division of the Department of Justice, Ed Mierzinski, the Consumer Program Director with the United States Public Interest Research Group, also known as PIRG, and Peggy Shanks is a Senior Examiner at the Office of the Maryland Attorney General. So with that, I turn it over to Chuck.
Thank you.
Okay,
thanks, Mike.
Okay.
So I'll let my panelists take their seats here, and I'll just begin with an observation. Who among us hasn't at one time or another thought, gee, wouldn't it be great if I could go out and start my own job? Maybe it was only a fleeting thought, but I suspect if we took a poll of consumers, we'd find that many of them think they have within them someplace the ability to make it on their own, to start their own business. Maybe they won't start the next Spanx, but at the very least they're going to go out and do something that will make them a little extra money. In many instances, it stops right there. Consumers think it'd be nice if I had my own business, but they pretty much stop at that point. But in times of financial anxiety, when people are feeling anxious, feeling uncertain, I suspect at times, for example, when people are thinking that their job is at stake, they think they need a little extra income because they aren't getting as many hours as they used to be getting, they're thinking they're facing extra education costs because they've got kids in college, they're worried about the medicine, or they're realizing, for example, that their retirement just doesn't go quite as far as they thought it would. But for whatever reason, they're feeling financial anxiety. And frankly, that's the kind of situation many consumers find themselves in right now. And when they find themselves in that situation, I think it makes them more likely to decide to take that next step, to go out and actually try to make money on their own, to sign up for a business opportunity, or to try to find a work-at-home scheme. And when they go out in the marketplace and begin to look around, what they find is, guess what? There are many, many companies and individuals who are happy to help them start that business opportunity program, or start that business opportunity, or start that work-at-home program. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about here today, business opportunities and work-at-homes. And the problem, as we're going to see in just a minute, is that while there are many legitimate opportunities out there, there are also many, many instances where consumers end up being scammed and find themselves worse off than they were before. So we have some eminent panelists here today who are going to talk to us about this. And I'm going to start with Lois Greisman, who's with the Federal Trade Commission. And Lois, do you want to talk briefly about what we're seeing with regard to business opportunity fraud schemes?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. It's a real problem, and it's a problem that's not going away, as Chuck highlighted, as others have highlighted. With the economic downturn, people are unemployed. They're underemployed. For various reasons, they need to supplement their income. I want to just take a moment and say, what is a business opportunity, or as we do shorthand, BizOp? It's just a commercial arrangement. I will help you. I will help set you up in business. You'll pay me to help you set up, and I'll provide you something that may or may not be real. Perhaps it's assistance securing an outlet, setting up a place, location assistance, or maybe I'll be willing to buy back your merchandise, which often is the touchstone of a work-at-home scheme, where you'll sit at home stuffing envelopes or building various pieces of crafts. And I'll buy them back and I'll find a market for you. Consistently a top complaint getter in the complaints the FTC receives over the course of a year. Last year, FTC received 1.8 million complaints. Business opportunities were in the top 20.
Thank you, Lois. And next to Lois is Rich Goldberg with the Department of Justice. Rich, I know you've done a lot of work in this area involved in concerning prosecution. Why don't you talk about one of the schemes you've seen and worked on, and talk about how you did the investigation and what you found?
Sure. Typically, the business opportunity firms that we investigate involve the sale of vending machines, coffee machines, internet kiosks, DVD kiosks, any kind of self-contained unit that can be placed in a retail outlet, and the locations are promised by the business opportunity firm as well. These are supposed to be high traffic, high profit locations where the buyer of the machine is going to earn a large profit. So frequently these salespeople use earnings claims. They'll tell prospective buyers that they'll make their money back within a year or so. They'll send them to references who claim falsely that they own a successful opportunity with these vending machines. Frequently they are the cousins or brothers or other salespeople who are posing as real customers, but in reality, they're getting paid to lie to prospective buyers. The customers will also be referred to locators who will promise these high traffic, high profit locations when in fact they are just part of the conspiracy. Now, one of the scams that some of our attorneys in the office have uncovered is a particularly nefarious kind of this scam. They did it in conjunction with the Postal Inspection Service. And this was a scam that appeared to be out of the US, various different cities where these scam artists purported to be in the US. They purported to sell coffee machines or greeting card display racks from the US. But in reality, they were in Costa Rica. All signs from the prospective buyers indicated that they were, in fact, in these cities in the US. They used voice over IP to make it seem like they were using real phone numbers in the US. They were using drop boxes in the US and other mechanisms to disguise the fact that they, the salespeople, the locators, and the references were actually all sitting in a boiler room in San Jose, Costa Rica. And so they had various phones in the boiler room that indicated the phone numbers, the US phone numbers that they were purportedly from. They had scripts saying, "Hi, I'm John Doe, and I'm a successful buyer of this business opportunity," so that the telemarketer sitting in San Jose knew what to say to the prospective buyers. Working closely with the Costa Rican government, we were able to execute search warrants, or Costa Rica was able to execute search warrants on the business opportunity rooms in San Jose. They were also able to do a number of arrests and extradite these folks back to the United States for prosecution, and they've received very high sentences as a result of the prosecutions. These typically, the scams that we've prosecuted have been ones where it's not true that these consumers should have been aware that they were being scammed. This isn't the circumstance of, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. Because these consumers are doing their due diligence. They're calling references. They're calling locators. They're looking at the Better Business Bureau, their website, to see, are these businesses highly rated? But the problem is these scams will open up under one name, they'll run for 9 or 10 months, and then they'll close down and resurface under a completely different name and location. So there's no way that the consumers could know. There's no way that the Better Business Bureau would know that this is actually a fraud that's been going on for years. So while in some contexts that advice is good for consumers in the business opportunity industry, they won't know. They need to just be very aware. They need to look at the advice that the Federal Trade Commission gives, because otherwise they're going to fall for this scam.
Thank you, Rich. Sitting next to Rich is Peggy Shanks, who's with the Attorney General's Office in the state of Maryland. And Peggy, do you want to talk about what we've seen from the state of Maryland in terms of these business opportunity
Yes, sir.
schemes?
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to say that anything that I say may not necessarily be the opinion of the Maryland Attorney General, the Maryland Securities Commissioner, and are based on my own knowledge, education, information, and belief. Having said that, today, many of the scammers rely on technology and use the internet and websites and upselling, but I can assure you that telemarketing and these cold calls are live and well. Recently, we got 4 such cases. One of them involves an elderly woman. I'm going to describe that case a little bit, but it's pretty much atypical. Caller A calls her and tells her he has a business opportunity. It's a great investment where she would purchase an internet website for an online mall where she would sell travel packages, and she's going to earn some commissions. And piqued her interest, so a little while later, caller B calls her, says he's going to be her account manager, he's going to help her set it up. If you buy 3 levels of packages, you can earn $9,600 with just 1 sale. So he also told her she's going to get these travel binders. It's going to have all these discount coupons and vouchers and things. It's going to help her for her business. So she buys her virtual office and gives them $300. On the same day after that, though, B says, well, you might need some national advertising because you're probably going to need to increase your sales and get people interested. CG gives him her credit card number and pays another $1,500. A day later, B calls her back and says, you know you could earn $1,000 from a sale as a level 1 with a level 1 director package. She pays an additional $2,000. 2 weeks later, B calls her to upgrade to a level 2 director package. This time she's going to get leads and auto blasts, and she's going to get 6,500 targeted visitors to her website. She was a little concerned because she had a credit card with a really high interest rate, but she put $4,000 on that credit card. 2 weeks later, C calls her, says, I think you should upgrade to a level 3 director package. Now the elderly lady says, oh, I'm sorry, all I have left is a savings bond for my daughter's college education. They said, oh, you're going to make so much, you're going to pay for your daughter's college education with the money you're going to earn. She writes a check for another $7,900. 2 months later, D calls her, and while they're at it, I guess they thought she still had some money. So for additional $600, she could get an autoresponder that would help promote that website. Months passed, and CG is trying to get these voucher binders, and she never receives any. She invested $18,300 and made zero money. In our state, the commissioner does not have the authority to order money paid back, but even if so, there was no money. This Arizona company after that filed bankruptcy. Now CG thinks as a creditor she's going to get her money back. We all know that's not true. Anyway, Maryland has issued a show cause order and they have not responded to it, so I can't tell you the outcome of the case. Excuse me, but in the order, it alleges violation of the acts, fraud, and other misrepresentations, and we're seeking for a permanent injunction, permanent bar against the company and the president from offering selling business opportunities in Maryland. Problem with all that is, just as Rich said, many of these companies, it's not a sinking ship. They resurface as a new entity, a new company name, or spouses or those sales reps, and they're at the helm of a new company, and so they sail on.
Thank you, Peggy. To my immediate left is Andre Brat, who's the United States Attorney in Los Angeles. And Andre, we just heard from both Rich and Peggy about business opportunity schemes they're aware of. Peggy talked about instances in which a consumer lost $18,000, will undoubtedly never see any of that money. I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the business opportunity fraud cases your office has prosecuted, how serious the financial losses have been in those cases, and what kind of relief or convictions you've been able to obtain.
Well, yeah, sure. I mentioned some of them earlier in my earlier remarks, and one of the, I guess, advantages, if you will, is that, you know, we try to devote our resources where we can get the biggest deterrent impact, the biggest impact. And when I'm being blunt, I say I'm talking really about the sentence. We will typically take cases that have a high dollar amount, you know, anywhere. I mean, you know, I hate to say given our dwindling resources, but we're usually talking at fraud schemes that are anywhere from the $2 to $5 million mark at a minimum. And there's a number of reasons for it. We have a number, you know, we've only got about 200 federal criminal prosecutors in our district to represent 18 million people. And so as you can imagine, we have to sort of pick and choose as it relates to the cases, but also because when we do the cases, we have sentencing guidelines that dictate, or at least are a guideline to the court, and oftentimes in these fraud schemes, they're tied to the loss amount. So we want to try to, if we're going to proceed forward, make sure that we get a sentence that we can let the public know that if you commit these kinds of crimes, you will go to prison for a significant amount of time. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the individual that had defrauded 87,000 victims, he went to prison for 6 years in federal prison. We've had individuals go to prison for 12 years involving schemes that were, you know, in the $39 million, $6.9 million in other instances. So we're really talking about high volume amounts with high sentences. And again, the purpose is because we want to be able to have the press and the public know that if you try to commit these schemes, the federal government's going to be watching, and we're going to try to impose, hold you accountable to the harshest sentence that we can.
Thank you, Andre. Let me next turn to Lois. And Lois, Andre's talked about some of the prosecution efforts that they've made, but what other what other activities are being undertaken to try to protect consumers from these scams? Are there other regulatory activities or rules in place that would help protect them? And after Lois, I'm going to come back to Peggy and ask her about her views at the state level.
Well, actually, the FTC now has a wonderful new tool at its disposal. It's a regulatory requirement that requires the seller of a business opportunity to provide a one-page disclosure, streamlined, short, and tidy as it can be. A series of disclosures about who's the seller, what's the nature of the business opportunity, prior litigation that the sellers may have been involved in, and perhaps most critically, if any earnings claims are made, you'll recoup your investment in 6 months, you'll start earning $10,000 a month. Anything like that, they've got to provide written substantiation for those claims. And the disclosure document also requires a list of references, so the consumer has at his or her disposal the ability to find out who purchased this most recently and what was their experience. The disclosure requirement took effect just March 1, and I can assure you the FTC, along with our partners at the state and federal level, will be vigorously enforcing it.
Thank you, Lois. And Peggy, how about at the state level? I'm curious, what sorts of resources are there available for consumers who want to learn more about business opportunities at the state level, and what can they turn to?
Well, we have the Maryland Business Opportunity Sales Act, where it covers, I like the new business opportunity rule. It's expanded in scope. It now covers, well, first of all, it says they only have to make a payment. Before, the threshold was a payment over $500. Under our law, it's a payment over $300 paid within the first 6 months. Under the new federal law, it now covers those work-at-home schemes. So I think that's really a good thing. Our law does not cover that, but the business opportunities that have traditionally or historically been covered they will still continue to register, and they will still be required to file a more in-depth disclosure document that's required under our Act, because it will give greater protection and more disclosures relating to the business opportunity. For example, the very first thing that it would do would be describe what the seller promises to do. It's going to talk about the agreements, sort of what Rich was talking about, and the location assistance, the name of locators, and those types of things. One of the most important disclosures is whether or not they're going to get an exclusive territory. Everybody knows competition is really important. They're going to disclose financing arrangement and other legend language, but they're going to include a copy of their audited financial statement, not older than 13 months. They're going to include risk factors if it's of a high risk or speculative nature. The most important thing is that they're going to get this disclosure document under the federal rule or state rule, and they're going to get it before they sign or before they pay any money. Under the federal rule, they get it 7 calendar days before they do that. Under Maryland law, it's 10 full business days. And this is to allow time for them to review that disclosure and to check it out before they invest.
Great. Thank you, Peggy. So I want to get to Ed, but it looks like we had enough time for me to ask a question that occurred to me as we were talking. And Lois, maybe this can go to you. It strikes me there are a lot of tools here for dealing with the business opportunity problem, the business opportunity fraud problem. What has your experience been in terms of trying to pull those tools together and sort of undertake a coordinated effort to try to stop it?
Well, we've got a pretty impressive track record here, and it's federal, state, it's federal and state, civil and criminal. In each of the last several years, we have coordinated with our law enforcement partners. We call them sweeps, call them broad initiatives, to pull together the resources to tackle business opportunity frauds and a whole slew of bottom dollar frauds. The most recent one was within the last 12 months. We always name them. It was called Empty Promises. No less than 90 actions were filed by the FTC and its law enforcement partners. We think this gives us the ability to have a maximum impact, a visual impact. It gets a lot of press coverage, and we always couple the law enforcement activities with a whole consumer education piece.
Okay, and Peggy, I know that you've worked on some of these joint efforts as well. Do you want to talk about that?
On the state level, we have limited resources for criminal prosecution such. However, in many instances, we work with the FTC, the U.S. Attorney, the Inspector General, the Postal Inspector, and even the FBI. And a case comes to my mind where there was such a joint enforcement action. Maryland had initiated an investigation, but we needed some additional assistance, so we went to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Very quickly, the FBI joined in and executed a search and seizure warrant. It resulted in a federal prosecution and a criminal conviction of a 32-year-old Mormon that was sentenced to 30 months in the federal penitentiary.
Thank you. And, before we get to Ed still, because I want to get there, but first, I wonder, what about from a criminal, Ed, you're really being patient, thank you. I wonder about the federal level criminal prosecutions. Are we successful in working together? Have you been successful working together with the states and with the FTC? Rich?
We have. The Department of Justice Consumer Protection Branch has participated in all of the sweeps with the Federal Trade Commission and the state counterparts. And in fact, over the last several sweeps, we've added our criminal prosecutions up to over 140 criminal prosecutions of business opportunity fraudsters over the last several years. Those have included defendants who have been sentenced to prison terms of a few years. The ringleaders have gotten sentences of 10 years, 15 years, and over 20 years in jail for this sort of fraud. We've had some defendants who are fearful of criminal prosecution and have fled to other countries, and we've been successful at arresting these folks who have fled in countries like Costa Rica and also the Philippines, and these foreign governments have been very cooperative at extraditing these individuals back to the United States for prosecution. So I think it serves a terrific deterrent effect, both the civil and the criminal actions.
If I could add, look, in our district, and I think this is nationwide, in a world of dwindling resources, the task force models seem to work well wherever you are. And quite frankly, most of our big cases we get from our partners at the state or local level or from a regulatory agency, because in some instances, like the case that Peggy described, that can be the tip of the iceberg, that we get some information about a ring that's going on, and we start to build upon it and get into bigger and grander losses that will get to our guideline level and really bring a big impact on the community.
Great. Well, thank you, Andrew. Now I want to shift gears slightly, but I'm wondering, we'll turn to Ed. And Ed, so we've heard about sort of the scams, we've heard about the injury, but who are the victims in these schemes? Are these people who just think they can make money overnight? What do you know about them?
Well, Chuck, I think people should turn to their left, and then they should turn to their right. Look at the people sitting here. It's not the other guy. Then look in the mirror. It's people like you and me. It's educated people. It's people who've done their due diligence. As David Vladeck said earlier, in the bad economy that we're facing, we have last dollar scams that target individual consumers for mortgage relief or debt relief. And we also have scams that target people whose jobs have been downsized, people whose spouses have been laid off, retirees whose 401ks read like Stephen King novels because of the crisis Wall Street dumped on us. So it's really everybody. And it's even people that have done their due diligence, as Rich said.
Andre, I assume you're seeing the same thing with your victims?
Well, absolutely. And that's one of the things, or one of the challenges that we have in trying to get the message out, to get victims to come forward. We recently had a press conference, not so much in the business opportunity realm, but in the residents and relative and distress schemes that were mentioned earlier. But we were able to get 7 folks to come forward. And when you looked at them, one of the persons I actually worked with in the city of Los Angeles in my prior job was a management analyst, college educated, fell for it. And so the challenge, I think, is getting people to come forward to feel that, look, it can happen to anyone. And that's, what we try to do is let people know that.
Thank you, Andre. So I'm assuming that in addition to law enforcement, there's an educational component to all this. And Ed, do you want to talk about what kind of educational efforts you know of or that are being made to try to teach consumers?
Well, briefly, I would tell you that, first of all, I think the Federal Trade Commission's website is the place that I would recommend that consumers start. Just look on their website, ftc.gov, at business opportunity fraud. Obviously, you should also check with your state attorney general. We have the Maryland Attorney General's office here. All your attorneys general are at NAAG.org. You can find their addresses there or on your state websites. The National Consumers League is here. They have a site, fraud.org, which is very helpful to consumers. And I would really advise people to not pay attention to the information from the people that are working possibly in fraud with the fraudster, but to consider talking to their friends, talking to local consumer groups, and saying, I'm thinking of giving somebody that I don't know $10,000 or $20,000 to make a lot of money. What do you think? And consider hiring an attorney for 1 hour of consultation. But there are a lot of places that I would start, but I would go first to the FTC.
Thanks, Ed.
And Lois, I assume, thank you. Lois, I assume you would also encourage people to take a look at that disclosure document if they can get that. try to get that.
Absolutely. I mean, we streamlined it to one page to make it as readable and as accessible as possible, and also to serve as a warning. If you don't get that one-page document, ask for it, and if you get a runaround, leave. But I want to just echo something that Rich and others, Andre, have said. Oftentimes, the victims are sophisticated people, and there just is no quick fix here, which is one of the reasons we've got to remain as vigilant as we've been in enforcement in this area.
Thank you, Lois. Let me finally, if the worst happens and people find they have been victimized, what should they do? They think they've discovered they're not going to get their money back. They've lost it. Lois, what are your thoughts?
File a complaint, ftc.gov. There's a reason we have tens of thousands of BizOp complaints, and we use them. We use them. Our law enforcement partners sitting here use them. They all go into a centralized database. Last year, 1.8 million such complaints went into that database. They are an absolute treasure trove. It's a resource that we can use to either develop a case in the first instance, or when we know there's a crook operating out there, to find victims to help us build up the evidence we need to shut them down. And I'd also urge people, obviously, to file complaints with the Better Business Bureau and also their state attorney general.
Peggy,
I would echo that. Both your federal and state regulators, the Attorney General's office also has a website, or you can call us. You're in the right church. It might be the wrong pew. They will forward that call to consumer or to securities or even to other state agencies. We network. We network with other state agencies across the country. We constantly send emails. A lot of the fraud we see comes out of Arizona and Nevada and Utah. And sometimes it's necessary to contact those agencies out there. But the main thing is to report it, to come forward. I know the first question everybody asks, how do I get myself in this? I ask myself that stuff all the time. It's no big deal. There are a lot of people that fall victims to business opportunity fraud. Nothing to be ashamed of. So the real question is, what can I do about it? Now, in Maryland, there is this private right of action to sue, but not just for not registering it's certain violations. Still, it doesn't mean that they're going to get their money back. But it's important to report it if you know someone that's been a victim, because it may prevent more victims. On a final note, I like to say, there's a new kid on the block. We have seen a new company that now contacts the victims and says they can help them get their money back, of course for a fee. So now they become victimized a second time.
great, thanks. Good cautionary notes. Let me see if anybody else. Andre, do you want to add anything else here before we close?
I think, briefly, the key thing is to report it, and that has been, quite frankly, the challenge. Many of these folks, after it's happened, they're like, how can I let myself do it? They're too scared to tell their friends about it, and that's what allows the cycle to go on. And I guess the other thing I thought is that, the whole purpose of this roundtable, town hall, if you will, is to develop those relationships and those partnerships. And so, look, I'm coming out here from Los Angeles, and I'm going to take this on the road, if you will, to Los Angeles, convene a meeting like this, because quite frankly, you are the vehicle by which we can get the word out to the streets, to the churches, the different community groups, et cetera, to let them know. I mean, look, these are great websites and tools, but if no one even knows to go to ftc.gov, they won't know where to file a complaint. But if you take that message out to your community groups that, look, here are some things that are going on, and ask us to come to you and give a presentation. I mean, we have a community relations specialist in our office. That is her purpose, their team's purpose, is to get out there and spread the message of what our agencies do to provide that service. Because at the end of the day, we're about protecting communities, but as I said earlier, we're only as good as the information that we get. And so it's a two-way street. And so I would just strongly encourage you to take us up on that offer. I mean, the Attorney General and Tony West and Lanny Brewer were serious about engaging in that continuing dialogue. This is not a one-time meeting.
Great. Okay, and I think on that note, that very forceful and powerful note, I should say, I think we'll stop here and turn it back over to our hosts. Thank you.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. That ends our panel sessions. I think what you saw here today with this summit, the three panelists and the remarks by the Attorney General and the other co-chairs of the Consumer Protection Working Group really best exemplify what this Financial Fraud Enforcement Task Force is all about. It's a mechanism to allow all the different federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies and offices, inspectors general, state attorneys general, and others involved in this area to get together and share information, share best practices, and talk about how we can do better, how we can help prevent fraud from occurring in the first place, and when it does occur, how we can increase our enforcement efforts. And I think what you saw today is a good example of that in action. As many people have said, this is not an end, but a beginning. We're going to continue to work together. As the Attorney General has said on a few occasions in the past, the schemes, in particular consumer fraud schemes and other financial fraud schemes, are as diverse as the imaginations as those who perpetrate them, and as sophisticated as modern technology will allow. Well, we are on to those schemes, and we're going to continue to pursue them and protect the American consumers and others from being victims of financial fraud. And we thank you all for your attention here today. Thank you.
Four panels on consumer protection this afternoon by the Justice Department.